Hello everyone, my name is Anna Kutsevolova. Today I will teach color theory class. As an example, I will use Brovi Pigments, which is my own line of pigments. Today I will explain for whom they will work, how to choose the correct color pigment for your client's phototype, what role melanin plays in the skin, how it affects the final color of burn makeup, and what you need to consider to be able to predict the final color that will retain in a month, 2 months, 6 months, 1 year, and so on and on. Meaning, in other words, how to work to always achieve a good color with the correct hue that you were aiming for. Let's start from a common belief that color theory in general, or in many artists' understanding, is just an Eaton's color wheel. I have it here and that's it. Or is how to correctly choose the pigment depending on the client's phototype in general. Not everyone realizes that in reality, color theory is a science about color physics, chemistry, and biology. As you see, these studies have nothing to do with art, makeup, and paint colors in general. First of all, when we put the pigment inside the skin, we implant it in the human's body. It is an important part that you have to understand. Also, it is important to know what we are implementing and what color it is. And we need to understand the process of depositing pigment inside the skin. This will help us to make accurate predictions about the final results. So what do we need Eaton's color wheel for? First of all, we use it so artists understand what colors are complementary to each other and how to offset a particular shade and what colors needs to be mixed together to receive a brown color. In general, brown can be obtained using a number of different ways, but the most basic method is to mix blue, red, and yellow colors in equal proportions and we receive brown. In permanent makeup, things are a little different, especially for eyebrows. To receive a brown color, we use black, yellow, red, and also white. Titanium dioxide is also used. As you can see, the color composition is changing and it is obvious that we don't need to use Eaton's color wheel. So what do we use it for in color theory? We use it to understand how to cover and block negative color shades at the correction procedure. Let's say you did eyebrows and they healed somewhat gray. What can we do to get them to a normal color? We look at Eaton's color wheel. The gray we have is approximately equal to blue. That is, meaning if blue is here, we draw a straight line. We can even put it like this. And let's see what we got here. We have orange. That's it. We take the orange corrector and work with it over the gray eyebrows. But right here, all masters have to understand that we cannot cover every negative color shade. In order to use the corrector, we must have an airy, light source which simply has a slight negative connotation. But at the same time, the work must be of high quality, meaning that the only thing that needs improvement is color shade, not the color itself, but just the shade. We cannot cover and correct dense colors such as blue, gray, and purple. We can only remove these colors. There is no need to cover them up. Why? Because inside the skin, pigment lays unevenly. Everyone thinks that the pigment inside the skin is located approximately here, and it is an even strip under the basement membrane in the upper layer of dermis. And this is wrong. When we do permanent makeup, the pigment is deposited somewhat chaotically and unevenly. In some parts, macrophages digest it stronger, in others, the pigment stays untouched because the particles were larger. Inside the skin, the pigment lies chaotically in the dermis, some deeper, some more closer to the surface. Well, it lies in the upper layer of dermis. And when you start working densely on the skin, in which the pigment lies chaotically with an orange corrector, you will just lay the new pigment on top. But inside the skin, everything remains the same. And this makes absolutely no sense. It will take only 1 or 2 months and your work will become the same blue, gray, or purple as it was before. As you can understand by now, all the dense work that was performed poorly has to be removed using a laser or removers, depending wherever the artist chooses based on his experience and expertise in removal services. Okay, so what else do we need to know about cover-ups? Alright, so before we move on, let's summarize. We cover only very light, airy, and transparent eyebrows that have a negative shade. We do it using Eaton's color wheel. We find that negative shade in the circle and choose the character that we need. If we have reddish brows, we take green character, olive color. If the brows are purple, lilac, we take yellow character or yellow-orange. If brows are gray or blue, we use an orange color character. Everything is simple. Sometimes there is also a mixed color of eyebrows. It looks a little bit sort of blue and a little sort of purple, something in between. When this happens, we can take two characters, orange and yellow, mix them in proportion 1:1 to receive a yellow-orange character and use it for cover-up. Same thing we can do for clients with green eyebrows. You know, sometimes there is a very light, almost unnoticeable green residue from brow tattoo, in which there happen an inversion of color after laser. To fix this, we take a red-yellow character and use it to cover up those brows. And this is pretty much all as far as cover-ups. I'm not spending too much time on this topic because I'm not a big fan of cover-ups in general. I just wanted to touch bases on this part of color theory, but now we will move on to the real color theory for permanent makeup artists, because everyone is talking about cover-up part of color theory in pretty much all classes and lessons, but in fact, most of the masters don't even need it. It's better for masters to learn how to remove poor quality work than learn how to cover it up. And we are moving on. Alright, and now let's get back to the color theory that will actually help us in permanent makeup. So what is coloristics in permanent makeup? It is a mix of sciences such as physics, chemistry and biology. Chemistry, it is everything that has to do with color composition. Composition, ingredients and what they're made of. What colorants are used, cosmetic base, organic and not organic. I think everyone knows these concepts as they are very much talked about now. We will not go too deep in the chemical part of color theory and we'll just move on. Physics. Physics is what every permanent makeup artist has to know. First of all, this is the Tyndall Effect, which always works with permanent makeup. So what is Tyndall's effect? This is a changed property of color. That is, we perceive color as color, but in fact it is a color wave, and in heterogeneous environment our eye perceives a different wavelengths. As you know, all colors have different wavelengths. Warm waves are red and orange colors and they are the longest. Shortest waves are purple and they are the smallest. Due to the Tyndall's effect, we see all objects in short waves, meaning that through density of air, through the space, through slightly transparent skin, fog, or it could even be a veil of rain, we see all objects in blue and purple hues. You can verify this yourself by simply looking at some distant object through the fog in the forest or in the mountains. You will notice that all the distant objects you see are somewhat blue. Blue and lilac are the shortest waves. From this you should understand that all the waves on our side are not long. And even if the object is a green color, which is a medium length wave, it will look blue. Same thing happens with the skin. The skin is not a homogeneous environment, it is semi-transparent. The skin has see-through qualities, but it's not completely see-through, about 50%. That's why the colors that we deposit under the skin distort. The stronger and the deeper we immerse the pigment, the more color is distorted because the thickness of the skin increases. The farther the distance we have from the objects that we are looking at, the colder it looks. Same thing happens here. As deeper we immerse the pigment inside the skin, the cooler it will look. And accordingly, this is the first and the most important rule that every permanent makeup artist should follow. Apply the pigment as close to the skin surface as possible in dermis and in no case to epidermis. This is the skin cutaway. Here it is pretty easy to understand what is happening. This is the layer of epidermis. This is basement membrane and the rest is dermis. For our eyes to interpret the color correctly, we have to deposit our pigments under the basement membrane. That is right here, into this papillary layer, right under it, and in no case lower. As soon as you lower the pigment here, or right here, the eyebrows will appear blue or purple, depending on what color was more in the pigment. So if the color of pigment is cool, which means it contains more of black color, then it will appear more blue. If the pigment is warm brown, in which the base color is red, then it will appear more purple. Everything is simple, because the deeper the red color goes, the more purplish it will look. Pay attention to the depth and remember what the Tyndall Effect is and how it helps masters in general. That is, that we need to work as close as possible to the surface layer, just under the basement membrane. Now let's talk a little bit about chemistry. What is the chemistry of colorants? It is a color composition. Color dyes can be organic and non-organic mineral. This directly affects how they will look inside the skin over time, because the molecules of the components of these colors are completely different. Organic dyes are very light and stay on the surface, but it is difficult to remove them later. Non-organic dyes are very heavy and they sink into the depths. In addition to that, they are oxidized because they are iron oxides, and they are oxidized by our body's acidic environment. As a result, they turn into reddish salmon color. I'm sure in your practice you saw the brows that, let's say in a year or year and a half, change the color towards orange and red shades. These are examples of non-organic pigments that contain red iron oxides, which oxidizes by the acid in our body's environment. So what to do? These pigments are easily removed by laser, so this is just the quality that minerals have. The size of the particles of paint also affects how they adhere to the skin. Coarsely dispersed pigments, in which the particles are larger, for example, as in this picture, they are very easy applied to skin. More finely dispersed, like this for example, are more difficult to apply to the skin. And there are also particles, many pigment companies start making them now, that look like an oblong rectangular. Those are very easy to apply to skin and they are lighter than the larger ones, which means they do not sink too deep in the dermis and look better. However, particles can be different regardless of if they are organic or mineral. You have to have a general understanding of what is organic and what is mineral and how they differ. We have now briefly discussed all this, but it takes a more detailed course if you want to deepen your knowledge. And pigmentology itself is a big science subject. You would need to devote at least several days to study it. In this color theory class, we learn the basic ideas that you need to know about pigments. What is organic and non-organic, how they differ, which ones are lighter and which ones are heavier. Please remember that organic pigments are lighter and they stay close to the surface and do not sink under their own weight deep into dermis. Which means if we deposited organic pigment right here, it will stay here, and with time, under the influence of UV rays and skin effluxiation, it will lighten up and disappear completely over time. Taking into account that the pigment was deposited correctly, airy and not too dense. If you deposit organic pigment too dense and too deep, it will be very difficult to remove it. It will be a lot more difficult than to remove inorganic pigment. You must understand this, that organic pigment particles are more dangerous than the mineral ones. But with light and proper work, the color will stay in much longer, meaning that the eyebrows will be worn longer and the pigment will fade away gradually through the top of the skin. Not through the lymph, not through our body and our lymph nodes, but through the top layer of the skin under the influence of the environment, such as sunlight. The pigment will lose color and gradually effluxiate with the epidermis. And now we are smoothly moving on to biology. Biology in terms of structure of our skin and presence of melanin in different types of the skin. And this is the most important knowledge that every permanent makeup artist should know. Biology is primarily the structure of the skin. We already spoke about it briefly. So we have epidermis, basal layer, dermis, and hypodermis that goes even deeper. Hypodermis the dermis does not interest us, we are interested in the top layer of dermis and epidermis. We must clearly understand that if we deposited pigment into the epidermis, that after 1 month it will be completely gone. Why? Because epidermis renews every month. If the skin is aged, then it will take longer for it to renew, about 45 days. That's pretty much maximum. That's why you have to understand that if you deposited color into epidermis, then in about a month it will be completely gone. That's why if you want color to stay, we have to deposit it under the epidermis, in the top layer of dermis or into the basement membrane. How to achieve that? We have to work very lightly at the first procedure so we don't go too deep. And in a month at the correction procedure, look at how much color retained and analyze if color retention is good. That means we are working at correct depth and we continue to work the same. If retention is low, then we need to deposit pigment a little deeper this time, because that means that you worked in epidermis and the pigment is gone. Now we will talk about phagocytosis. What is phagocytosis? It is the process of absorption of paint that we deposit by macrophages and the digestion of these paint particles. This is how every tattoo process happens. We deposit pigment inside the skin, it becomes inflamed, macrophages come, roughly speaking, this is our pigment, they absorb this pigment and start digesting it. Some of the pigment they digest completely and remove it from the body. And some of it they digest a little bit and the particles become smaller and remain in the skin. And that's where we come back to chemistry and different particles of pigment. Coarse pigment is much more difficult for macrophage to digest than a fine one. That's why the retention rate when we work with fine, small-sized pigment is lower, because our body just cleans it out and removes it from the skin using macrophages. This process is natural and we can't change it in any way, but how can we use it to benefit us? The more superficial we introduce the pigment into the skin, if we apply it right under the basement membrane, the less macrophages attack the color, because their main goal is to protect the dermis layer. And the deeper we deposit the pigment into the dermis, the more macrophages start to absorb and digest color particles, because they need to clean derma. And they recognize the pigment as some trash that needs to be cleaned and removed from our body. And if we deposit the pigment too deep, the macrophages absorbs it and the fibrous tissue forms around it, around the pigment particle. And this fibrous tissue also changes color a lot, because it is dense and light. And here we need to remember Tyndall Effect and understand that pigment will look more blue because it is deeper and it's covered with fibrous tissue plus the thickness of the skin. This all changes wavelength, and that's why the brown color we will see as blue, dark blue or some other kind of blue. So just remember, when we deposit pigment too deep, the fibrous tissue forms around color particles. And this is very bad. That's why we need to work superficially to avoid formation of fibrous tissue and to retain the maximum amount of pigment. Slowly but surely, we got to the most important concept in color theory, melanin. Melanin, just so you understand, is located in epidermis. This is the epidermis zone, that's where melanin is located. The amount of melanin, there are two different types of it, tells us about the skin color. That is, the presence of melanin directly affects the skin color. Because melanin is located in epidermis, we learned that already, and we deposit the color under epidermis in the top layer of dermis, we have to understand, and this is a very important thing to know, that when the color of epidermis changes, then the color of the pigment that we see through it also changes. For example, if we take different color plastic, let's say semi-transparent green and red, and lay it over same color, we will see that color differently. Because the tint of a plastic, and in this example plastic is our epidermis, changes the color of the object. And what is melanin? Melanin is the natural pigment of the skin. There are two different types of it, eumelanin and pheomelanin. Eumelanin can be black and brown colors, and pheomelanin red and yellow. You need to memorize it. Another thing to remember is that the quantity of pheomelanin never changes. The amount you were born with stays with you for life. But the quantity of eumelanin changes under the influence of ultraviolet radiation. For example, when you tan, more eumelanin appears in your skin to protect our bodies from ultraviolet sunlight. So what influences our skin color? We are all different colors. Some of us are more yellow, some are more red, some are more orange, some are more copper, some are black, some are white, some with a blue tint, and some with freckles, right? So melanin and some other factors let us have all these different skin colors and tones. One of these factors is keratin, it is an orange pigment, and hemoglobin, red pigment. Both of these pigments are present in the skin and change its shade a little. But the most important pigment that affects our skin color is, of course, melanin. The more eumelanin of black and brown colors there is in the skin, the darker your client's skin looks. Also, there are some types of skin that have only pheomelanin and do not have any eumelanin in it. For example, people with freckles. The freckles, these little brown spots, that is actually pheomelanin pigment that has a lot of red color in it. Also, there are people that have a very little eumelanin in their skin and they look very pale. There are also people that don't have any eumelanin at all and almost have no pheomelanin. They tend to burn really bad under the sun, and these people are also known as albinos. Their skin is light pink and eyelashes are white and hair is white too. And now we smoothly approach the division of all people into color types or phototypes. I use Fitzpatrick classification. It is simple and easy to use, and it helps permanent makeup artists tremendously. There are 6 different phototypes according to Fitzpatrick, from 1st to 6th. First phototypes from 1st to 2nd are the lightest ones, and 5th to 6th are the darkest ones. You should remember that the first 3 phototypes are the easiest and the most comfortable for permanent makeup artists to work on. The other 3 are a little more complicated to work on. Why? Because they contain larger quantities of eumelanin. As we learned before, the eumelanin in large quantities has a negative effect on the color shade. As more black and brown eumelanin in the skin, the more color is distorted to the cooler side, the same way as from the depth. Now let's talk in detail about each phototype and learn how to work with them. First phototype is Celtic. Let's make it a little bigger. We see that the girls in this phototype are light colored, often they have freckles, red heads, or they are albinos with white hair. When working on them, we use the lightest shades of pigments. In a second, I will explain what pigments to use. As I said, we're gonna use the lightest shade. From my color palette, that would be Grey Harbor and Ripe Wheat. Before using any of the pigments, we have to shake them really well. The colors we took are both light blonde in 2 different variations. One is more warm and the second is more cold. Which color is warmer? The one that has more orange. In our case, it's Ripe Wheat, which we use for warmer colored hair. And the second pigment, Grey Harbor, we use for clients with cooler hair shades. Also, in our palette, we have color Freckle, which is for really red-headed girls, also phototype 1. It is very warm and can be mixed with these 2 pigments that I already showed you. So all of these 3 colors are good for phototype 1. Also, I would recommend for all girls that have freckles to add yellow character to freckle or take Grey Harbor as a base color and mix with freckle 1:1, and then you will have a really good result. Why? Because as we learned earlier, all people with freckles have a lot of red pheomelanin in their skin. What is red pheomelanin? That's pretty much a red pigment in the skin. So if we take the color with red base for girls with freckles, then red plus red will give us too much red and healed eyebrows will look purple. That's why it is always important to add a yellow character or use a light blonde color pigment with a yellow base. That's pretty much it about phototype 1. Just remember to use either color with yellow base or add yellow character. Now phototype 2. This phototype is very easy to work with and is one of my favorites, Nordic phototype. It includes all types of blondes, light blonde, warm blonde, cold blonde, and blonde with gray tint. For them, I recommend using the same colors as we used earlier, Grey Harbor and Ripe Wheat. They can be used as is, meaning that for cold blonde whose hair looks more grayish, we can use Grey Harbor that has yellow base. For warmer blondes that look more copper, I would even say wheat-looking ones, we can use Ripe Wheat color. As you see, the name of the pigment talks for itself. You can add a character if, let's say, you see that the result after 1 month is cooler than what you need. In this case, you would add an orange character to the color. About 9 drops of color and 1 drop of character. That's about 10%. And you would have a warmer color to work with. And that's all for this phototype. Like I said, this one is an easy one. They have light-colored hair, light-colored eyes and skin that has not too much melanin, a little bit of pheomelanin. Everything is normal level, which makes it very comfortable to work with these two phototypes. However, the first and the second phototypes are considered to have cool undertones. The next phototype that is relatively easy to work with is Eastern European. That's the phototype that I have. The hair can be dark, but the skin is light. The hair can be any color, and the eyes are pretty much always green, blue, gray, brown. Not dark brown, but rather light brown. And hair color can be very different too. Yes, it can be straight black if compared to white skin. Also, people of this phototype don't have too much of melanin in their skin, but just enough to get tanned. And also, their skin has enough pheomelanin of red and yellow colors. All of the above makes this phototype very comfortable to work with, because pretty much all the colors heal into the color that you see during the procedure, except the times when they lighten up just a little bit because of the color of the pigment is distorted by the skin color. So here we can use dark color shades that we have in our palette. In my case, it will be roasted chestnut and bitter chocolate. Bitter chocolate is a more cool, neutral shade that is perfect for darker hair colors. And roasted chestnut is a warmer shade with orange base. It is good for the hair like mine. Let me show you what it looks like. This is roasted chestnut. The bitter chocolate will be a little darker and has more of a yellowish base. And as we already know, the yellow base is a cool base, and this is a bitter chocolate. With this phototype, we can use those colors easily and not be afraid that the color will be distorted. As far as all other phototypes, for example, if we will use dark colors for other 3 phototypes, for example, use bitter chocolate, we may have great brows at the end. Why? Because in the other 3 phototypes, in 4th, 5th, and 6th, there are already large enough quantities of black and brown melanin that will distort our colors. So if we take a look at the 4th phototype, Mediterranean, we see that they have dark hair, dark skin, often with olive tint, and dark eyes. What does it tell us? It tells us that they have more melanin than in the previous Eastern European phototype. So if we take bitter chocolate color, it has about the same amounts of yellow, red, and black pigment to make it as dark as possible. Plus, if we add the black melanin that is already in the skin, in our case in Mediterranean type, we will have too much black color. That's why for clients like this, it is better to use a color like roasted chestnut, because it has an orange base and has less black color in it than red and yellow, which makes it a better color to work with on skin that already has too much melanin in it. All of the above applies to the next 3 phototypes, Everything exactly the same, just gets more difficult. For example, we already know that we can use rosy chestnut on Mediterranean phototype as is. But let's say we take a fifth phototype, which is Asian, and in this type, let's say we take a darker skin client, not light Asian with a yellow tint, but dark skin, darker brown. Then there is already more melanin, and we need to take this into account. So we can take rosy chestnut and add to it a drop of corrector to make the color more suitable. Or let's say that we have a skin with a yellow tint. That means that it consists of black eomelanin plus yellow pheomelanin. So we need to use pigment with orange or red base. And if we have the skin with warmer shade, brown or copper, kind of reddish skin, for these clients we need to take pigment with a yellow base. Because their skin already has a lot of red pheomelanin and black eomelanin, which means that we need to add yellow. We use pigment with yellow base or take a darker shade pigment, let's say rosy chestnut, and add to it a drop of yellow corrector, not orange. So for yellowish skin, orange corrector, for reddish skin, yellow corrector. It's simple. And for clients like this, we never use our darkest pigments, like bitter chocolate. It is suitable only for light colored clients because it has a lot of black color pigment in it. And now we have our last phototype. It is 6, African, and it's practically not subject to pigmentation. Why? Because this phototype already has a lot of black and brown eomelanin in the skin and pretty much won't let us change the skin color at all. This phototype includes lighter and darker shades. So for a very dark colored skin, it doesn't make sense to do permanent makeup because the color of the pigment won't show through. If you take the darkest pigment you have, let's say something like bitter chocolate or, God forbid, black pigment, then black plus black will give you a gray or steel color on the skin. It will be a very cold shade because black on black gives us grayish bluish shade. If your client's skin is light enough for permanent makeup, which means it doesn't have too much of black eomelanin and the brows will show on skin, then we should take pigment color that is not too dark and does not contain too much black in it. Even rosy chestnut color would be too dark. I suggest taking something lighter like ripe wheat because it contains more yellow and red pigment than black. It will be better color to work with. It is less dangerous and the brows will still show off on your client's skin because we deposit additional colors, but they won't turn cold blue when healed. Or if you decide to use rosy chestnut, which has a warm brown tint to it, you will need to add orange corrector and possibly also add a little bit of yellow. But it is very important to add orange corrector. Work on African skin type, you have to be really skillful and experienced artist. If you are not that experienced yet, then make sure you don't use the darkest pigment to work on this type of skin, because it may not heal to the color you expect. And this is pretty much all as far as phototypes and brow pigments. Now I want to talk a little bit about eyes. Eyeliner pigments will always look cooler on African phototype. So if you decide to do eyeliner for Afro-American clients, keep in mind that they will always heal blue, even if you work very close to the skin surface, because the epidermis layer will distort the pigment color. So the darker your client's skin is, the more chances there are that the black color will look blue or gray on their skin. So let's say if we take first, second and third phototypes, the black will heal black. On the fourth phototype, it might look a little grayish, on the fifth one it will look more gray, and on the sixth one it will be dark gray, blue or gunmetal color. I would just recommend not to do eyeliners on these phototypes, but it is totally up to you, and if you decide to do it under your own responsibility, then you know what it will look like when healed. And that's it as far as brows and eyeliners. The color theory for lips permanent makeup is much simpler than for brows, because epidermis on our lips is very thin and its color almost doesn't affect the final healed color of permanent makeup. Why? Because, as I already said, the lips epidermis is 4 times thinner than the epidermis on eyebrow skin. Thus, if the lips have any of the black eumelanin, it consists only in 5th and 6th phototypes. These color types have large amounts of black eumelanin, which affects lip color and they turn more gray. And in these phototypes, we need to use characters for lips. Something like watered down orange. In my palette, this character is called salmon, and it's used only for the clients that have grayish lips. For all other phototypes, you can choose the pigment depending on what color lips your clients want and how bright they want it. So sometimes there are clients that want base color, natural one, more warm or more cool. And sometimes there are also clients that want a decorative look, that would look more like lipstick. They want bright colors. There are 8 different pigments for lips in my palette. And now I'm gonna tell you what colors are used for what lips. Let's start with base colors. What is a base color in my understanding? This is the color that is most suitable for my client's lip color. There are 4 base colors in my palette now. 2 warm shades and 2 cool shades. Keep in mind that we shouldn't use cool base pigment on lips that are cool color as well. That is, the lips that have gray shade from 5th to 6th phototype, and also on lips that turn blue when the client is cold. When we get cold, our lips either become pale or turn blue. So if lips turn blue and have a purplish tint, then we shouldn't use a cool shade base color. Let's start with warm base colors. The first one I have in my palette is Salted Caramel. It is a very light, warm caramel color with an orange base. You can use it on all lips except dark ones. It is useless to apply it to dark lips because you won't see any results. Next pigment is Old Castle. It is a darker version of Salt Caramel. If you look here, you will see that the colors are very similar, but the color shade is different. Color shade meaning brightness. The Old Castle is darker shade and Salted Caramel is lighter. So for the light blonde clients, it is good to use lighter shade, which is Salted Caramel. And for darker hair clients, like me, it is better to use darker shade, because their lips almost always are brighter color than the light skin clients. As you see, the darker the skin color, the more melanin is in the skin and the darker the lips are, and we choose the shade accordingly. The next 2 pigment colors are cold. They are the ones that we cannot use on cool lips. It is Dusty Rose and Cocoa Beans. Let me show them to you. And now, comparing them side by side, you will understand how different they are and why we cannot use them on cool lips. Because they have a very strong pink tint. This was a Dusty Rose and this one is Cocoa Beans, which is a darker version of Dusty Rose. You can see now how darker and cooler it is. As you see, the 2 colors are very similar, but they have a cool shade. So these 2 warm base, these 2 cold base. It's simple. You decide what color shade you need and then you choose the pigment color and work with it. And I also have 4 more colors in my palette. I call them decorative. Let's start with cold ones. These are the cold shades that you can't use on cold lips. First color is called Pink Opal. It is beautiful, bright pink color, very saturated, but it is also very cold and you can't use it on cool shade skin at all. The next color is neutral. It's called Raspberry Tart. It is a beautiful color that suits most of the phototypes and it can even be used on cooler lips, because it is a lot warmer than, let's say, Pink Opal. And I also have Red Strawberry and Juicy Watermelon. They are both red, but one is lighter and one is darker. You can use them on any lips, because they both have a warm base and will look good on any lip color. This one here is Juicy Watermelon. It is bright and has a kind of orangey base. And Red Strawberry. It is most saturated red color. It is also warm. What's good about these two colors? Why do I like these colors? As for me, I always prefer decorative colors. Why? Because they always have less titanium dioxide. The less titanium dioxide is in the lipstick, the brighter it is. And accordingly, the less it needs to be applied to the skin in order to get a vivid shade result. So let's say we take Dusty Rose and compare its color to Juicy Watermelon. We will see that Dusty Rose has a lot more white in it, white color in it, which is a titanium dioxide. What are the risks of using pigments with titanium dioxide in them? If you use these colors and apply them to skin very densely, let's say you want to do lipstick lips and deposit a lot of pigment particles inside the skin, then in a year or two, when the bright color particles fade away, your client will be left with whitish lips that on top of it will be always dry, because titanium dioxide dries the lips. That's why I always prefer to use brighter colors. I just water them down to make them lighter and apply them in aquarelle technique. That way, the permanent makeup on lips will just fade away in 2 years, because it was applied very superficially and the skin color shows through. If you want to do brighter lips, then just use brighter pigment colors and apply them very superficially and your lips will look just perfect. Personally, I don't like lipstick technique in permanent makeup because I prefer more natural looks. So lipstick is not something I would do, let's say, using Dusty Rose pigment, but it's just me. Some artists like dense colors, matte lipstick effect, I would say. It is also very harmful to skin because there is a large amount of titanium dioxide, and as we already know, it stays inside the skin forever. So think before you do it. And this is pretty much all as far as pigments for lips. I also have a few correctors in my palette, and I already explained how and when to use them. For lips I have 3 correctors. One is salmon, one is orange, and one is orange-red color. Let me show you what they look like. So what is the difference between salmon, orange, and red-orange correctors? Here I have an orange corrector. Red-orange has more red color in its base. These 2 correctors do not contain any titanium dioxide. And if you look at salmon corrector, you will see that it has that white shade to it, which means it contains titanium dioxide. So what should you use it for? This corrector we use only to neutralize cool grayish lips, darker ones that we have in African and Asian phototypes. That is when lips have purplish, grayish and other cold shades. We have to work very densely with this corrector because this is the only way to lighten up cold color lips. And then when the client comes back to the correction procedure, we choose the color shade we want. But of course, we use only warm colors. On the other hand, red-orange corrector we use to warm up the pigment color. So you take any pigment, let's say cocoa beans, which is a cool shade. We have it here. Look at it, it's a dark cold shade. And let's say we want to make it warmer, so it is more suitable for cool lips. What we need to do is to add a red-orange corrector, about 1-2 drops. There is 10-20%, and the color will become warmer and it won't be as cold. As a result, we will receive a beautiful shade that will look good on cool lips, like the ones that turn blue when cold. That is what we use correctors for in permanent makeup for lips. That's pretty much it. Choose the right color and work in gentle aquarelle technique to apply pigment to lips, and your work will look amazing. So let's summarize. Today we learned color theory for permanent makeup and how to correctly choose the pigment color, considering the amount of melanin in the skin and depending on the client's phototype. Using this knowledge, you will be able to predict the healed color in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and to know what will be left when pigment fades away. That is, organic pigments fade away and shed away, and non-organic can sink down and turn red over time. So now you will understand why with time your work can change the color or don't show off at all. And most importantly, remember to apply pigment superficially, that is deposited in the layer right under epidermis, on the basal membrane or in basal layer, and then your work will look great. because the color will not distort due to Tyndall's effect. That's one thing. The other thing, to receive a quality results, you must use quality pigments and of course use a professional machine. Because as less traumatized the skin is when you deposit the pigment, the more of a pigment will stay inside the skin and the less corrections you will need to do to achieve perfect results. And those were the 3 important things you need to remember to achieve quality results over time. As I said, it is very important to use quality pigments. You can trust me on that one. I've been doing permanent makeup for over 8 years now and did more than 8,000 procedures. A few years ago, I created my own line of pigments. It's called Brovi Pigments. I taught color theory class using them. They are quality pigments that guarantee quality results. The retention rate is up to 90% just after one procedure. They are easy to use and heal true to color, and my favorite, they are universal for all skin types. Supreme Permanent is the only official Brovi Pigments distributor in the United States. To place your order, go to supremepermanent.com, click Shop Brovi Pigments, shop all pigments, and choose the colors you like. And I have great news for you. When you place your order now and use the code CTC10 in your checkout, you will get 10% off your entire order. Thank you again and happy shopping!